Jack Morgan had always lived a quiet life. A retired engineer, he spent his days working on small projects around his house on Earth. He wasn't rich, famous, or important. Just a simple man who found comfort in his routine. But all of that changed one ordinary afternoon. Jack was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping his coffee, when his communicator beeped. He hadn't received anything like this in years. The message was short, clear, and left him staring at the screen in disbelief. Jack Morgan of Earth, you have inherited the fortune of King Zoreth of the Vorathian Empire. You have also been named the guardian of 4 royal princesses. Please report to the Vorathian capital immediately. For a moment, Jack thought it was some kind of prank. He looked around his humble kitchen, confused. Who was King Zoreth? And why would a king from another galaxy want to leave everything to him? His hand shook as he read the message again, but it was real. The transmission was official, from a recognized source. Jack had no memory of ever meeting the king or even hearing his name, but the message was clear. The will was signed, and Jack was the heir. It made no sense, and yet there was no mistaking it. His curiosity grew, and with a mix of nervousness and excitement, he clicked the acceptance button. Within seconds, a holographic image appeared in front of him. It was a large alien, tall and imposing with silver-blue skin and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through him. This was King Zoreth. Jack Morgan, the king's deep voice echoed. Many years ago, you saved my life when you repaired the starship I was aboard. I owe you everything. This inheritance is my way of thanking you. You are now the guardian of my 4 daughters, the princesses of the Vorathian Empire. They are yours to care for, and I trust you will give them the protection and guidance they deserve. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had repaired a starship once, sure, but that had been a routine job on a trade route, a small forgotten mission for a minor client. How could that lead to this? Please, the king's image continued. Hurry to the Vorathian capital. My empire is in need of strong leadership. I place my faith in you. With that, the transmission ended. Jack was left alone, still trying to process what had just happened. He had inherited an entire empire, a fortune beyond his understanding, and the responsibility of 4 alien princesses. It seemed impossible. What did he know about ruling an empire? About taking care of princesses from another world? Nothing. Jack was just a simple human from Earth. This was all so overwhelming. Before he could think too much about it, the next message arrived. A shuttle had been arranged for him, ready to take him to the Vorathian homeworld. There was no time to waste. With shaking hands, Jack packed what little he needed and prepared for a journey that was beyond anything he could have imagined. Hours later, he was aboard the shuttle, looking out the window at the vastness of space. He was leaving Earth behind, heading into the unknown. The stars seemed to stretch on forever, and Jack couldn't help but feel a strange mix of awe and fear. What would await him on the Vorathian homeworld? Would he truly be able to manage the responsibility he had been given? Could he live up to the late king's trust? The journey was long, but Jack had little to do but think. When the shuttle finally entered the Vorathian system, he couldn't help but marvel at the sight of the capital city. It was like nothing he had ever seen. Massive floating cities, glowing with advanced technology, all built on a planet that looked both beautiful and dangerous. It felt like a dream, one he wasn't sure he was ready for. As the shuttle landed, a group of Vorathian officials was waiting for him. They were dressed in elegant robes and held themselves with an air of superiority. It was clear they weren't happy to see a human, and they didn't try to hide their disdain. "Welcome, Earthling," one of them said coldly. "You've come to claim your inheritance, but do not think for a second that we will bow to you." Jack stood tall, trying to appear confident, though inside he was a bundle of nerves. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he wasn't about to back down either. He had been chosen for a reason, and he would face whatever came with determination. "I'm here to honor the king's will," Jack said, trying to sound more sure of himself than he felt. The officials looked at each other, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see about that," one of them muttered. Then they led Jack into the royal palace, where the princesses were waiting for him. The 4 princesses were everything Jack had expected: beautiful, elegant, and regal. But their eyes, full of doubt and judgment, told a different story. They didn't look at him as the king's chosen heir. Instead, they looked at him like a joke. "Are you the one we're supposed to trust?" the eldest, Princess Aria, asked with a laugh. "A human. Earth is nothing more than a backwater planet. This must be some kind of mistake." Jack felt a flush of anger rise in him, but he didn't respond. He couldn't afford to make enemies already. "Well," said Princess Lyra, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "since Earth is so advanced, I'm sure you'll have no problem taking care of us, right?" Jack held his ground, determined not to let their mocking throw him off. He wasn't just any man. He was here for a reason, and it was time to prove himself. Little did the princesses know, Jack's journey had only just begun. Jack Morgan stood in the grand hall of the Vorethian palace, feeling out of place as the 4 princesses looked down on him with barely concealed amusement. The room was enormous, filled with shimmering crystals and strange, floating holograms. Alien art decorated the walls, and strange, soft music played in the background. It was a beautiful sight, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was an outsider, like a tiny insect in a vast, powerful world. Princess Aria, the eldest, studied him with narrowed eyes. "So, you're the one who inherited everything?" she asked, her voice cold and filled with disbelief. "I don't understand. What do you even know about ruling an empire?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I may not know how to rule an empire," he said, his voice firm, "but I do know how to solve problems and think on my feet. That's how I got here, isn't it?" Aria raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see," she muttered under her breath. Princess Lyra, who stood next to Aria, let out a soft laugh. "An earthling who thinks he can lead us. How quaint." She turned to the other princesses, her voice dripping with mockery. "This should be entertaining." Jack remained silent. He had expected this. The princesses were used to power, used to respect, and they certainly didn't expect to find it in a simple human. But Jack wasn't just any earthling, and he wasn't about to let their mockery get under his skin. A sharp voice broke through the tension. "Enough," said Senia, the second youngest princess. She had dark purple skin and sharp, intelligent eyes. Unlike her sisters, she didn't seem to share their attitude. "We may not like it, but we have no choice but to follow the will of the king." She looked at Jack, then added, "That doesn't mean we'll make it easy for you." Kale, the youngest princess, stepped forward next. She had silver hair and a mischievous smile. "Let's see if you can survive the challenges first, human," she said with a teasing tone. "It'll be fun to watch you fail." Jack straightened up, not letting their comments faze him. "I'm not here to fail," he replied simply. "I'm here to do the best I can." The princesses exchanged skeptical glances, but Jack didn't wait for them to respond. He was tired of standing around, and he wanted to get things moving. He had no idea what kind of challenges awaited him, but he wasn't going to back down. If he was going to lead these princesses, he needed to show them that he could handle whatever was thrown his way. An official in a dark robe stepped forward. "The first trial will begin shortly. You must prove yourself in the right of leadership." Jack looked at him, his brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" The official smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. "You will be tested. Your ability to lead, to think quickly, to make decisions under pressure. Only the strongest and most capable can pass." Before Jack could ask more, the official waved his hand, and the floor beneath him suddenly shifted. A small door opened up, and Jack found himself standing on a platform high above an alien landscape. The air was thick with fog, and strange, haunting sounds filled the atmosphere. He could barely see the ground beneath his feet, and the landscape seemed to stretch on forever, full of unfamiliar dangers. "This is the trial of survival," the official's voice echoed from somewhere above. "You must navigate through the wilderness and reach the other side. But be warned, this world is full of dangers." The princesses watched from a distant observation platform, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They had no faith in Jack, and they were certain he wouldn't survive. But Jack wasn't about to give up that easily. He stepped forward, taking in his surroundings. The fog made it hard to see, but he could hear the distant sound of something large moving through the mist. His engineering skills and quick thinking would be tested here. Jack had faced difficult situations before, and he was ready for whatever came next. The first few steps were easy, but soon Jack found himself wading through thick, wet grass and over rocky terrain. Strange creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes glowing in the fog. Every now and then, Jack would hear a rustling sound, and he'd quickly move away, trying to avoid whatever dangerous creature was lurking nearby. Hours passed, and Jack's body began to tire. He was thirsty and hungry, but he couldn't stop. He had to keep moving. As he navigated through the thick underbrush, he spotted something glowing in the distance, an ancient stone structure, half hidden in the mist. He knew it was the way forward. But as Jack approached, the ground beneath him suddenly shifted, and he fell into a pit that opened up beneath his feet. He landed with a painful thud at the bottom, groaning in discomfort. He could see no way out, but then he noticed something else, a strange, glowing device embedded into the walls of the pit. It looked like something he could use. Jack's mind went into overdrive. He had repaired starships, fixed machines, and solved mechanical puzzles all his life. This was just another challenge to overcome. Using his tools and his knowledge, he began to work, slowly but surely, unlocking the mechanism that would help him escape. Above, the princesses watched the holographic display of Jack's progress. At first, they scoffed at his failure to avoid the trap, but as they saw him work through the problem, their expressions changed. There was something about his determination, something they couldn't ignore. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human was more capable than they had first thought. Jack finally climbed out of the pit and continued his journey. He wasn't finished yet, but one thing was clear. He wasn't ready to give up, and this trial was just the beginning. Jack Morgan's muscles ached, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the mist that surrounded him. The strange world he was navigating was harsh, and every step forward felt like a battle. His fall into the pit had been a setback, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it had only strengthened his resolve. He couldn't afford to quit. Not now, not after coming this far. The glowing device he had found in the pit was now secured in his backpack. Jack had no idea what it did, but it might be useful later. For now, he kept moving, focusing on his goal, reaching the other side of this wilderness, and proving to the princesses, and to himself, that he was worthy of this responsibility. As he walked, the landscape seemed to change. The fog began to lift, and Jack saw tall, towering trees that stretched toward the sky like ancient giants. The air grew warmer, and the sounds of strange creatures filled the air once more. But this time, Jack wasn't as frightened. He had faced worse. He could handle it. Jack continued on for what felt like hours, each step bringing him closer to his goal. His mind raced with thoughts of the princesses. What were they thinking of him now? Had they given up on him yet? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let their doubt affect him. If he was going to lead, he had to show them he was strong, capable, and determined. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound from behind him. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, his body tensing. Out of the mist, a large creature emerged. It was like nothing Jack had ever seen before. A massive, reptilian beast with scales that shimmered in the light. Its eyes glowed a fierce red, and its fangs were long and sharp. Jack's instinct was to run, but he didn't have the time. He reached for his backpack, quickly pulling out the glowing device. He had no idea how it worked, but it was his only chance. As the creature began to charge at him, Jack pressed a button on the device. To his surprise, a bright beam of energy shot out, striking the creature square in the chest. The beast recoiled, screeching in pain as it stumbled backward. Jack didn't wait to see if the creature was truly defeated. He ran, his legs burning with exhaustion, but his focus sharp. The device seemed to have worked, but Jack knew better than to think he was safe. The wilderness was full of dangers, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He kept running, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the beast. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jack reached the edge of the wilderness. He emerged into a clearing, breathing heavily, his legs shaking from the strain. Ahead of him, a large bridge stretched over a vast chasm. On the other side, Jack could see the faint outline of a city. He had made it. He had completed the trial. But the challenge wasn't over. The bridge was old and looked fragile, and there was no telling what dangers lay ahead. Jack hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. His mind was made up. He couldn't turn back now. As he crossed the bridge, the wind howled around him, and the wooden planks creaked beneath his weight. The chasm below was deep, and a single wrong step could send him tumbling into the abyss. Jack took his time, carefully placing one foot in front of the other. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to be careless. Halfway across, a loud cracking sound echoed through the air. Jack froze, his eyes widening as the bridge shuddered beneath him. It was starting to break apart. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had no choice but to keep going. He couldn't fall now. With every step, the bridge seemed to weaken further, the planks splintering and breaking apart. Jack moved faster, his adrenaline kicking in as he pushed himself to the limit. He could see the other side now, just a few more steps. He could make it. At the last moment, the bridge gave way beneath him. Jack leaped forward, just as the last plank cracked and fell into the chasm. He landed on solid ground, rolling to absorb the impact. For a moment, he lay there, gasping for breath, his heart racing from the close call. He had done it. He had made it across. Jack sat up slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow. His body was sore, his mind exhausted, but he had proven something to himself and to the princesses. He wasn't just an earthling. He was someone who could face whatever came his way, no matter how impossible it seemed. As he stood up, he saw a figure approaching. It was one of the princesses, Princess Senia. Her sharp eyes studied him for a moment before she spoke. "You made it," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and respect. "I didn't think you would." Jack shrugged, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "I told you I wouldn't give up." Senia nodded, her gaze softening just slightly. "You may not be the leader we expected, but you're proving that you have something the others don't." Jack smiled, though it was a tired, worn-out smile. "I'm just getting started." Senia didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing the entrance to the city in the distance. "Come on," she said, "we still have a long way to go." Jack followed her, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He was starting to realize that this wasn't just about leading an empire. It was about proving that no matter where you came from, no matter how small you might seem, you had the strength to overcome anything. And Jack Morgan was ready to prove that to the galaxy. As Jack walked beside Princess Senia through the bustling streets of the alien city, he couldn't help but marvel at the scale of it all. Tall, glowing towers stretched up into the sky, their surfaces reflecting the pale light of two nearby moons. Strange vehicles zipped through the air, their engines humming with a soft, otherworldly sound. The air smelled faintly of spices and metallic perfumes, and the hum of activity filled every corner of the city. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Senia led him through narrow alleys and down a series of stairways, avoiding the main roads. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, trying to keep up with her quick pace. "We are headed to the Hall of Judgment," she replied curtly, her tone revealing little of what she was thinking. "You have passed the wilderness trial, but that was just the beginning." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Judgment? What kind of judgment?" Senia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The final test. You've made it this far, but that doesn't mean you're fit to rule. The Hall of Judgment will decide your fate." Jack swallowed hard. He had been prepared for challenges, but the idea of being judged in some formal, ancient way made him feel uneasy. He had no idea what the Hall of Judgment was or what kind of test awaited him, but it was clear that it would be unlike anything he had faced so far. They reached a large, imposing building, its walls covered with intricate patterns and symbols Jack didn't recognize. 2 guards stood at the entrance, their eyes scanning Jack with suspicion as he approached. Senia spoke a few words in a language Jack couldn't understand, and the guards stepped aside to allow them entry. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with silence. The hall was vast, its high ceiling supported by columns made of a dark, polished stone. At the far end of the room was a large throne, empty but looming over the space. The walls were covered in strange murals depicting what Jack assumed were important events in the history of the Vorathian people. "I have brought him," Senia said, her voice echoing in the hall. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall being whose presence seemed to fill the room. His skin was a deep shade of blue, his eyes glowing with an intense, almost unnatural light. He wore flowing robes that shimmered in the dim light, and his gaze was piercing, as though he could see into Jack's very soul. "Welcome, Earthling," the figure said, his voice deep and commanding. "I am the guardian of the judgment. You stand before the council to prove whether you are worthy of leading the Vorathian Empire." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The guardian's gaze never left him as he continued. "Before you can inherit the throne, you must pass the trial of wisdom," the guardian said. "This is no ordinary test of strength or survival. It is a test of intellect, of leadership, and of your ability to make choices that will affect not only yourself, but an entire civilization." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. A test of wisdom. He had always been good at solving problems, but this was a whole different level. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he couldn't back down now. The guardian raised a hand, and the air around Jack seemed to shimmer. Suddenly, a series of holographic images appeared in front of him. Each one represented a complex decision that Jack would have to make. Decisions with consequences far beyond what he could imagine. The first scenario, the guardian's voice boomed, concerns the future of your people. You must choose whether to risk your empire's resources on a potential alliance with a distant civilization that could either be a great asset or a deadly threat. The first hologram flickered to life, showing a map of stars and planets. One of them, marked with a red symbol, was inhabited by a species Jack had never seen before. They looked peaceful, but something about them seemed off. "Do you trust them?" the guardian asked, his voice echoing in Jack's mind. "Do you risk everything on an unknown?" Jack stared at the map, his mind racing. He knew the importance of alliances, but the risk of betrayal was high. He thought about his home, Earth. They had been cautious in their dealings with other nations, and that caution had kept them safe. But this wasn't Earth. The stakes were much higher. After a long pause, Jack made his decision. "I would choose to send a small, carefully selected delegation to assess them first. Trust, but with caution. We can't afford to gamble with everything." The guardian nodded, his expression unreadable. A wise choice. But now, let's move on. The second scenario appeared. This time, the hologram showed a massive city under attack by a hostile alien race. The inhabitants were panicked, and the defenses were crumbling. Jack could see thousands of people fleeing into the streets, trying to escape. "You have limited resources," the guardian explained. You can either send the majority of your military forces to defend the city, or you can prioritize saving as many civilians as possible, leaving the city to fall. What do you choose? Jack's mind immediately went to the value of human life. He knew that every decision had a ripple effect, but he also knew that protecting civilians was paramount. However, abandoning the city would mean the loss of important resources and a strategic location. I would send in a portion of the military to evacuate civilians first, prioritizing their safety. At the same time, I would deploy a small, elite force to hold the line long enough for the evacuation to succeed. The Guardian was silent for a moment. Then, with a slow nod, he acknowledged the choice. Another thoughtful decision. Now, the final scenario. The final hologram showed a devastating plague sweeping across the Vorathian Empire. It was highly contagious and had already claimed thousands of lives. Jack could see the panic spreading across the planet as people tried to escape the virus. Do you quarantine the planet and risk the Empire's collapse, or do you try to continue operations, risking the spread of the disease further? Jack stared at the image of a collapsing society, his heart heavy with the weight of the choice. The virus was an enemy like no other, and he knew that rushing a decision could doom them all. Quarantine the planet, Jack said firmly. We can rebuild, but we can't bring back the dead. The Guardian looked at Jack for a long time, and finally he smiled. You have passed the trial of wisdom. You are not only capable of thinking on your feet, but you understand the greater picture, the value of life, the cost of decisions, and the balance of power. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had done it. He had passed the test. But as the holograms faded and the hall fell into silence, Jack knew that the real challenge was only just beginning. The air in the Hall of Judgment still buzzed with a strange energy after Jack's success. As the last hologram faded, the room returned to its eerie silence, the tall columns casting shadows over the floor. Jack's heart raced in his chest, but there was no time to rest. The Guardian, who had stood motionless throughout the trials, began to speak once more, his deep voice echoing across the hall. Congratulations, Earthling, the Guardian said with a hint of respect in his voice. You have passed the trial of wisdom. Your choices show that you possess the qualities necessary to lead. But know this is only the beginning. The path to power is not an easy one, and there are those who will challenge you. Jack nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The weight of responsibility was starting to sink in, and it felt heavier with each passing moment. He had come this far, but he wasn't sure what lay ahead. The next step will be far more difficult. The Guardian continued. You must earn the trust of those who serve the throne. You will face their judgment as well. The court will decide if you are truly worthy of inheriting the power of the Vorathian Empire. Senia, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her eyes were fixed on Jack, her expression unreadable. She had been by his side through everything, but the look she gave him now was different. It was as though she were sizing him up, evaluating him as though he were a stranger. Do not think that the challenges you face will come only from external forces, she said quietly. The court is full of powerful figures, each with their own interests and ambitions. Some will welcome you, but others may wish to see you fail. Jack could sense the gravity of her words, and he couldn't help but wonder just how far the political games went in the Vorathian Empire. If he had any hope of surviving, he would need to be clever and learn to navigate the web of power. The Guardian raised his hand, and with a soft hum, the floor beneath them began to shift. The ground trembled as the hall itself seemed to move, parting to reveal a dark passage leading down into the depths of the palace. A cold breeze rushed up from below, and the shadows seemed to grow longer as they descended. This is the path to the throne room, the Guardian explained. It is not just a physical journey, it is one of the soul. Only those who are truly ready to bear the weight of leadership may walk this path. Jack swallowed, his mind spinning. There was so much to consider, so much at stake. He had been thrust into this world of intrigue and power struggles, and there was no going back. He glanced at Senia, who walked beside him, her steps silent but purposeful. "What is it that awaits us down there?" Jack asked, trying to steady his voice. "The final trial," Senia replied, her tone more serious than he had ever heard it. "It is not like the others. It will not be a test of intellect, but of character. You will face yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your desires, and your fears. The throne demands complete honesty. If you cannot face the truth of who you are, you will not succeed." Jack's heart skipped a beat. A test of character. He wasn't sure what to make of that. Could he even face himself in such a way? The deeper they descended, the more the pressure seemed to mount. It was as if the very walls were closing in on him, testing his resolve. They finally reached the end of the passage and emerged into a large, dimly lit chamber. The room was circular, with a single throne in the center. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, a strange mix of elegance and power. The throne seemed to pulse with a life of its own, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. Around the room, shadows seemed to move and shift, as if watching them. "Sit in the throne," the guardian instructed. "Your trial will begin once you do." Jack hesitated for a moment, staring at the throne. It felt like more than just a seat. It felt like the embodiment of everything that had brought him to this point. Everything he had fought for, every decision he had made, had led him here. But could he truly sit in the throne and accept everything that came with it? With a deep breath, he walked toward the throne. As he sat down, a strange sensation washed over him. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. But the moment he did, the voices began. "Do you believe you are worthy of this power?" a voice asked, low and insistent. Jack opened his eyes, but the room was empty. He looked around, but there was no one in sight. "What makes you think you can lead an empire?" another voice questioned, sharper this time. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his mind. "I don't know," he muttered aloud. "I'm not sure I am, but I can try. I'll do whatever it takes to make the right decisions." "But will you?" the voice sneered. "Will you be able to make the hard choices? Will you stand by your values when everything falls apart?" Jack's mind raced, and for a moment, doubt crept into his heart. Could he really live up to the expectations placed upon him? Could he really rule with integrity when everything around him seemed so uncertain? As the voices continued, Jack realized something important. He wasn't alone in this. The throne may be a symbol of power, but true leadership came from within. He had to trust in his own abilities and find the strength to face the challenges ahead. "I will face whatever comes," Jack said with determination, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I will lead with honor." The shadows seemed to recede, and the voices fell silent. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the throne lift just slightly. The trial had only just begun, but he was beginning to understand something crucial. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true to oneself, no matter how difficult the road ahead. The air felt thick with tension as Jack stood in the grand court of shadows. It was a massive chamber with towering columns and strange, floating lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. The floor was made of a smooth black stone that seemed to absorb the light, creating a sense of deep, endless space. Around him, a circle of alien leaders and powerful figures sat on elevated platforms, their eyes watching him carefully. They had all come for one thing: to determine whether Jack was worthy to inherit the throne and rule over the Vorithian Empire. Senia stood by his side, her expression unreadable as the court's attention turned to Jack. She had warned him that this moment would come, but now that it was here, he could feel the weight of it all. These were the most powerful beings in the Empire, and their judgment could change the course of his life forever. The first to speak was a tall, armored alien with glowing green eyes. He was one of the leaders of the military faction, known for his ruthlessness and iron will. His voice echoed through the room as he addressed Jack. "Tell us, Earthling, The alien's voice boomed. "What makes you believe you are capable of leading an empire such as ours? You are nothing more than a mere human, weak, fragile, and untested. You do not belong in this court." The words stung, but Jack refused to let his emotions show. He had expected hostility, but this felt different. It felt personal. He had to prove to them that he was more than just a human from a small, insignificant world. He squared his shoulders and looked the alien directly in the eye. "I may be human," Jack said, his voice steady, "but I am not weak. I faced trials and challenges far beyond anything I ever imagined, and I've learned that strength doesn't come from the body. It comes from the heart and the mind. I may not have the power of your armies or the knowledge of your scholars, but I have something just as valuable: the will to do what's right, no matter the cost." There was a murmur among the council members. Some seemed surprised by his response, while others remained indifferent. The tall alien stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. "You speak of will," the military leader said, "but will is not enough. The empire needs a ruler who can command respect, who can lead through fear if necessary, a ruler who can crush opposition and maintain order. Do you have the strength to do that, Earthling?" Jack's hands clenched at his sides, but he held his ground. This wasn't about ruling through fear. It was about ruling with fairness and integrity. "I don't believe fear is the way to lead," he said, his voice firm. "True leadership comes from earning respect, not forcing it. If I become ruler, I will not rule with an iron fist. I will rule with justice." The room fell silent. The alien leader who had spoken before seemed to weigh Jack's words, his glowing eyes narrowing in thought. Finally, he nodded slightly, though there was no sign of approval. "I do not agree with your methods," the alien said, his voice cold. "But perhaps you have more wisdom than I gave you credit for." Before Jack could respond, another voice interrupted. This one was higher-pitched, almost musical, but it carried an unmistakable authority. A striking alien with shimmering blue skin and elaborate markings stepped forward, her robes flowing behind her like liquid. She was one of the leaders of the diplomatic faction, known for her ability to weave complex alliances. "Do not be so quick to judge him," she said, her tone soft but commanding. "He is right. The world we are in is changing. The old ways of fear and power are no longer enough. The people want a ruler who will lead them into a future of peace and prosperity. I, for one, believe that Jack has the vision to create such a future." A few members of the court nodded in agreement, and Jack could feel a sense of hope stirring within him. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this after all. But then, a voice cut through the air, a voice that was both calm and chilling. It came from an alien with translucent skin, his features barely visible beneath the layers of his dark cloak. He was a member of the Council of Shadows, an enigmatic group that rarely spoke but held great power. His eyes glowed a soft purple as he stared down at Jack. "Do not be fooled by words, my friends," the alien said slowly. "Words are nothing without action. The true test is not in what he says, but in what he does. We have seen him pass trials, but these trials were designed to test his intellect. What we need is someone who can handle the complexities of leadership. What we need is someone who can navigate the web of politics, deal with betrayals, and make the tough decisions." Jack felt a chill run through him. The Council of Shadows spoke in riddles, but their meaning was clear. They weren't interested in rhetoric. They wanted results. They wanted someone who could survive in the cutthroat world of politics and power. "I agree with the council," the alien continued. "A ruler is only as strong as the alliances they make. The question is, can Jack form the right alliances to rule this empire?" Senia stepped forward then, her gaze sharp as she addressed the court. "Jack has already shown he has the strength to form alliances, even in the most difficult of circumstances," she said. "He has earned the trust of those who serve him, and he has proven that he will stand by his word. You may not agree with his methods, but you cannot deny his ability to lead." The room was silent for a moment as the council members exchanged glances, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected this to be a test of his intellect, but it was turning out to be a test of his character. His heart, his resolve, his ability to navigate the complexities of this alien world. These were the things that mattered. The Council of Shadows murmured among themselves, and the military leader stood, his expression hard. "You may be right," he said finally. "But you still have much to prove, Earthling." Jack nodded, his determination unwavering. "I will prove it," he said quietly, but firmly. "I will prove that I am worthy of leading this empire." As the court fell into an uneasy silence, Jack knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready. He would fight for the future of the Vorathian Empire, no matter what it took. The Grand Hall was quiet as Jack stood before the Council of Shadows. It had been a long and difficult journey, but this was the moment that would decide everything. The entire empire had watched his every move, waiting to see if this Earthling could really live up to the legacy of the late King Vorath. The Council had tested him in every way they could think of. His intellect, his diplomacy, and his ability to lead. Now, it was time for the final judgment. Senia, standing beside him, gave a small nod of encouragement. She had been with him through it all, helping him navigate the complexities of Vorathian politics, teaching him the subtle art of leadership. Without her guidance, Jack knew he wouldn't have come this far. But now, it was up to him to prove that he was ready to rule. The council members, each from different factions, took their seats on their elevated platforms. The alien leaders, who had once been so skeptical of him, were now watching him with a mix of curiosity and doubt. They were waiting for him to either rise or fall. The weight of the moment was immense. A tall figure, the leader of the military faction, spoke first. His deep, booming voice echoed throughout the chamber. "You have faced our trials, Earthling, and you have earned our respect. But respect is not enough. We need to know if you can lead us to victory, to prosperity, to strength." Jack looked up at him, his gaze unwavering. "I don't promise victory in every battle," he said calmly. "But I promise that I will fight for the people of this empire. I will lead with honor and integrity. And I will make sure that the future of this empire is one where every citizen has a chance to thrive." There was a murmur in the room. Some members of the council seemed impressed by his words, while others remained skeptical. The tall military leader nodded, though he still didn't seem fully convinced. "I will not make promises I cannot keep," Jack continued. "But I will ensure that we all work together, that we put aside our differences and unite for a better future. The empire has been divided for too long. It's time to heal and move forward." A voice cut through the room then, soft but powerful. It was the voice of the alien who had once spoken in support of Jack, the leader of the diplomatic faction. Her skin shimmered in the soft light of the chamber as she stepped forward, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Jack has proven time and again that he is capable of leading," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "He has the courage to stand by his principles, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. He has shown that he values cooperation over conflict, diplomacy over violence. These are the qualities that will make him a great leader." The room fell silent as the council members processed her words. Jack could feel the weight of their gaze on him, each one of them trying to decide if he was truly worthy of the throne. Then, from the shadows, the cloaked figure of the Council of Shadows spoke. His voice was cold, calculating. "You have earned the support of many, Earthling," he said, his eyes glowing softly. "But the question remains, can you handle the responsibility of ruling an empire of this size? The challenges will be immense. The politics, the betrayals, the constant threats to your reign. Will you crumble under the pressure, or will you rise?" Jack took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had already faced many challenges, and he knew there would be many more to come. But he was ready. More than ready. "I will rise," Jack said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "I will rise, not as a ruler who seeks to control, but as a leader who seeks to unite. I will face every challenge head-on, and I will never back down from doing what is right. This empire deserves a future of peace, not war. And that is what I will fight for." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Jack could feel the eyes of the council members on him, studying him, weighing his words. Finally, the cloaked figure nodded slowly. "You speak with conviction, Earthling," he said. "Perhaps you are the one we have been waiting for." A ripple of approval passed through the room, and the military leader spoke again, his tone softer than before. "You have proven yourself, Jack. You have shown that you have the heart of a leader. You will have my support." One by one, the other members of the council began to speak, each offering their approval, albeit with varying degrees of hesitation. But in the end, it was clear that Jack had won them over. His words, his actions, and his unwavering commitment to the people of the Empire had earned their respect. Senia stepped forward, her eyes filled with pride as she turned to Jack. "You did it," she whispered, a smile on her face. Jack nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had made it. He had earned the throne, but more importantly, he had earned the trust of those who would help him rule. The Council of Shadows stood as one, their decision final. "Then it is settled," the cloaked figure declared. "Jack, Earthling, you are now the ruler of the Vorathian Empire." The room erupted in applause, and Jack's heart swelled with a mix of pride and responsibility. This was just the beginning. There would be many challenges ahead, but Jack knew that with the support of those who believed in him, he could lead the Empire into a new era of peace and prosperity. As the applause continued, Jack took his first steps toward the throne. It was a symbol of power, yes, but also a symbol of the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. The weight was heavy, but he was ready to bear it. The future of the Vorathian Empire was now in his hands, and Jack was determined to make it a future worth fighting for.